Unlike the Jedi Order, which changed rarely and usually over long stretches of time, the Sith were constantly in flux, reshaping their order in an effort to overcome their ancient enemies. As Dark Lords rose and fell, many left lasting impressions on the Sith as a whole, making adjustments to its structure and ideology. Some of these Dark Lords were especially prominent innovators, Sith who instituted major changes that defined entire eras of Sith history, and in this video, we're going to be talking about some of the most impactful. Massive thanks to the sponsor of today's video, Boot.dev. Whether you want to build your own droid OS, work a stable back-end job on Coruscant, or launch something totally off the grid on the Outer Rim, knowing how to code is a skill that opens doors in any galaxy. Boot.dev teaches back-end web development from start to finish, in Python, JavaScript, and more. You'll write real code, build real projects, and learn by actually doing, not just watching videos. Right now, I'm working through the Python course, which feels a bit like learning how to talk to droids without needing a translator unit. They've also got courses on Git, Linux, SQL, and even memory management in C, which is pretty much trying to fix a hyperdrive while it's running. If you've ever wanted to actually understand how systems work under the hood, this is where you start. Learning to code takes time. It's not a weekend project. That's why staying engaged is everything, and that's what Boot.dev gets right. It's built to keep you moving, with interactive lessons, game mechanics, and projects that actually hold your attention long enough to make real progress. And as you progress, you'll also unlock pages in your spellbook, a cheat sheet of key links and notes to reference anytime. And if you're worried about value, they offer a 30-day, no questions asked refund. So if you've been thinking about learning to code or leveling up what you already know, this is a really solid place to start. Head to boot.dev and use my code Geetsly for 25% off your first year with the annual plan. Links in the description below. Now, back to the video. Now, before we begin, keep in mind that this isn't a list of the most important Sith Lords. It's about Sith who altered the way the Sith worked in some fundamental way. While Darth Vitiate, for instance, was one of the most important Sith in history, most of what he did as a Dark Lord was perpetuating the structure of the old Sith Empire, and it was only after he abandoned the Sith that he became more innovative. We're more interested in the Dark Lords that redefined what the Sith were, and while all of them were among the most important Sith Lords, not all important Sith fell into that category. With that little disclaimer out of the way, let's begin. We'll start with the last Dark Lord of the old Sith Empire, Naga Sadow, the architect of the Great Hyperspace War. Sadow was a powerful sorcerer who traced his line back to the original lords of the Sith, and he came to power in 5000 BBY at the end of the Golden Age of the Sith. In his time, the Sith Empire stood at a crossroads. For the past few centuries, it had enjoyed prosperity and stability, especially during the 100-year-long reign of Marka Ragnos, Sadow's predecessor. But the Empire had also stagnated. It hadn't made any major conquests in generations, and as Naga Sadow saw it, this threatened to unravel everything the Sith had built. Empires are predicated on expansion, and as Naga Sadow saw it, the Sith Empire was long past due for a new wave of conquests, which would make it even more powerful and prosperous. After Marka Ragnos died, Sadow sought to replace him as the Dark Lord of the Sith, vowing to usher in a glorious new age of expansion for the Sith Empire. But Sadow faced opposition from a long-time rival of his, the fellow Sith Lord Ludo Kresh, a conservative who was wary of change and believed that the Sith should focus on maintaining what their predecessors had built. Kresh also sought to be Dark Lord of the Sith, and he and Sadow didn't even wait until Ragnos' body was sealed in its tomb to begin squabbling over rule of the Empire. In the middle of Ragnos' funeral, the two drew their swords and fought on the steps of his tomb. But they were interrupted by the sudden appearance of Marka Ragnos' spectre, which warned them a critical moment was at hand for the Sith, following which a Republic scout ship descended from the sky. This was the first Republic vessel to enter Sith space since the arrival of the Dark Jedi who had founded the Sith Empire, and the Sith responded to its arrival with suspicion. They seized the ship and imprisoned its owners, the Force-sensitive siblings Gav and Jory Daragon, whom Ludo Kresh wanted executed immediately. He feared that the twins were the vanguard of a Republic invasion force. But Naga Sadow saw an opportunity in the Daragons' arrival. He believed they could lead the Sith fleet back to Republic space, paving the way for a grand invasion of the Republic. As the Daragons' route to Korriban led back all the way to the Republic's core territories, Sadow believed that an all-out invasion could topple the Republic and leave its countless worlds defenseless and ripe for conquest. The Sith Council initially sided with Kresh over Sadow, but Sadow was able to manipulate the other Sith Lords into siding with him by faking a Republic raid that killed Lord Simus, one of the Council's most revered members. Determined to avenge Simus, the remaining Sith Lords named Naga Sadow their new leader, and he immediately began planning an invasion of the Republic. Sadow released the Daragons, manipulating Gav into becoming his apprentice and allowing Giorgi to flee back to the Republic, allowing the Sith Armada to follow her all the way to the core. Thus began the Great Hyperspace War. Without warning, Sadow's fleet poured into the Koros system, from which it spread to Coruscant and several other worlds, catching the Republic by surprise and inflicting grievous losses in the initial assault. From a meditation sphere above the supergiant Primus Golud, Sadow used Sith sorcery to make his forces appear far more numerous than they actually were, and he used battle meditation to guide his forces to victory. Naga Sadow and his followers came close to conquering the very heart of the Republic, but the Dark Lord's plan was undone when Gav Daragon, his apprentice, realized the error of his ways. Gav returned to Primus Golud and attacked Sadow's meditation sphere, breaking the Dark Lord's concentration and causing his illusions to vanish. In the confusion, Republic forces triumphed over the Sith fleet, and the remnants of Sadow's Great Armada was forced to flee back to the Sith Empire. As his fleet fled back to Korriban, Sadow planned to regroup and prepare for a Republic counterattack, but when his ships exited hyperspace, they found that in their absence, Ludo Kresh had anointed himself Dark Lord of the Sith and gathered what forces Sadow had left behind to his banner. Even as Republic forces pursued Sadow down the Daragon trail, he and Kresh wasted what remained of the Sith Empire's once mighty armada in a bloody battle over Korriban. Kresh was killed in the battle, but the arrival of the Republic Navy left Sadow with no time to celebrate. Recognizing that the Sith Empire was doomed, Naga Sadow fled to Yavin 4, where he spent the rest of his reign in exile. The reign of Naga Sadow changed the Sith forever, for better and for worse. His actions destroyed the original Sith Empire, squandering its military strength and seat of power. But in the process, it transformed the Sith as an order, allowing them to survive. Because Naga Sadow was right about one thing: stagnation is a death sentence for empires, and it's a death sentence for the ideology of the Sith as well. Had Ludo Kresh gotten his way, the Sith Empire would have lasted longer, but it would have slowly faded, and the teachings of the Sith would have faded with it, eventually leading to their extinction. The Great Hyperspace War reinvigorated the Sith, reawakening their slowly dying lust for conquest and ever greater power, the foundation of Sith ideology. From a Sith perspective, Sadow's war had brought the Sith back onto the one true path, and the destruction their order suffered afterwards was merely a culling of the weak. This conflict was also the very first open war between the Sith and the Republic, the first, but not the last. This was perhaps Naga Sadow's biggest innovation, the most important change he made to the ways of the Sith. While the ancient Sith had always dreamed of destroying the Jedi, the Republic had never really factored into their plans. Naga Sadow was the first Sith Lord to attempt to conquer the Republic to bring the galaxy under Sith rule, and his example would inspire all the Dark Lords that started the later Sith Wars. Sadow passed on his dream to future generations of Sith, and over the millennia, numerous Dark Lords sought to finish what he started. Naga Sadow gave the Sith their dream of galactic conquest, and while he failed to topple the Republic, his heirs would eventually succeed. Our next great Sith innovator lived 1,000 years after Naga Sadow, at the very start of the old Sith Wars. His name was Exar Kun, and like the exiles who had founded the Sith Order, he had originally been a Jedi. Kun was one of 3 apprentices trained by the legendary Jedi Master Vodo Siosk Bas, and from early on, Kun was clearly the most gifted of the bunch. He had a natural talent for lightsaber combat, a fierce hunger for knowledge, and a fascination with the Sith. In those days, the Jedi believed the Sith had been vanquished long ago, but Exar Kun wasn't so sure. Through his unauthorized studies of his master's collections of Sith holocrons, he became convinced that it was only a matter of time until the Sith returned, and he believed the Jedi weren't doing enough to prepare for their resurgence. He ultimately set out on his own to search for more Sith lore, hoping to learn more about them so that he could one day stop them. Kun's quest took him to Onderon, where the followers of the Dark Lord Freedon Nad had recently returned and been defeated. During his investigations there, Kun encountered the spirit of Freedon Nad himself, who led the young Jedi to the Valley of the Dark Lords on Korriban. There, Nad drew Exar Kun down the path of the dark side, playing on the young man's impatience, hunger for knowledge, and hatred for the Sith. Nad compelled Kun to use the dark side to survive the dangers of Korriban, and as Kun rapidly began to succumb to the dark side, Nad led him to Yavin 4, to the secret temples Naga Sadow's Massassi warriors had built during his exile, where Exar Kun gave in at last. In Naga Sadow's temple, Exar Kun embraced the dark side, destroying Nad's spirit with an ancient Sith amulet and using the power of the Sith to conquer the Massassi. On Yavin 4, Exar Kun immersed himself in the teachings of the Sith. While his Massassi followers built new temples in his honor, Kun rapidly grew in power, learning all the arcane arts of Naga Sadow and the ancient Sith. But he didn't stay on the jungle moon forever. Before long, he learned of the fallen Jedi Ulic Qel-Droma, who had become affiliated with a Sith cult called the Krath, and Kun determined that they could be a threat to his power. He traveled to Sinagar to kill Qel-Droma, but during their duel, the Sith amulets the two men wore conjured a vision of Marka Ragnos, who declared that Kun and Qel-Droma were the future of the Sith. He named Exar Kun the Dark Lord of the Sith, declaring that, because of him, the Sith would never die, and Ulic Qel-Droma became Kun's first and greatest apprentice. At Ragnos' urging, these two new Sith Lords joined forces, vowing they would bring down the galaxy. Together, they began the Great Sith War. While Ulic Qel-Droma amassed an army and started a new war with the Republic, Exar Kun began spreading heresies among the Jedi, attempting to recruit many of the younger apprentices by promising to usher in a new golden age of the Sith. Some joined Kun willingly, while the Dark Lord took control of others with the help of Sith spirits. Some of these new Sith apprentices joined Kun and Qel-Droma's war effort, while others acted as sleeping giants, remaining among the Jedi until, on Kun's command, they rose up and slaughtered their masters, throwing the Jedi Order into chaos. The Great Sith War was brief, but it was incredibly destructive. The armies unleashed by Kun and Qel-Droma sowed destruction all across the galaxy, ravaging world after world. But the worst damage was done to the Jedi Order. Kun's followers killed many of the Jedi's greatest masters, and Exar Kun also masterminded the destruction of Ossus, eliminating the Order's ancient homeworld and destroying a ton of Jedi teachings in the process. The Jedi Order had to rebuild almost from the ground up after the end of the war, and the scars Exar Kun left on the Jedi persisted for centuries to come. Exar Kun was defeated in the end. His armies were defeated by the Republic military, and, after Ossus, Ulic Qel-Droma defected back to the Jedi and led the Republic fleet to Yavin 4. As the Rim fleet blotted out the sun in the skies above Yavin 4, Exar Kun gathered the Massassi to him, absorbing their life essences in a ritual meant to free him from his mortal form, rendering him an immortal entity of dark side power that could spread unchecked across the stars. As Kun carried out this ritual, however, the Jedi created a wall of light around Yavin 4, and when the wave of darkness rising from the moon collided with it, it created a firestorm that ravaged the surface of Yavin 4, destroying Exar Kun and the last of his followers. Exar Kun's spirit survived, freed from the constraints of his mortal body, but it became trapped on Yavin 4. Exar Kun was remembered as one of the greatest Dark Lords of the Sith, and for good reason. He revived the Sith after a millennium of dormancy and dealt grievous damage to the Jedi Order, unleashing one of the most devastating wars the galaxy had ever seen. This war was only the first of the old Sith wars, and over the course of the following years, Exar Kun's successors would build on his examples, unleashing war after war. They nearly seized control of the whole galaxy, and their campaigns wouldn't have happened had Exar Kun not paved the way. The manner in which Exar Kun waged his war would also significantly influence how the Sith operated going forward. While the old Sith Empire had always simply crushed its enemies, Kun attempted to defeat the Jedi by destroying them from within, converting Jedi to his cause and using them as a weapon against their masters. This was also an example many later Sith would follow, one that consistently had a devastating effect. Exar Kun also made sweeping changes to how the Sith operated, and this was his most important innovation, one that would ensure the Order's survival into future eras. Previously, the Sith Order had been dominated by Sith purebloods and hybrids, and though a few aliens, mostly humans, were inducted into the Old Order at times, the Sith Order had nonetheless remained firmly rooted in Sith pureblood society up to this point. Exar Kun severed that connection, even as he honored the legacy of the old Sith Empire. Under him, the Sith became primarily an order of fallen Jedi drawn from all manner of species, not bound to any one civilization. Up to this point, the Sith Order had been an outgrowth of the Sith Empire, chained to the civilization from which it had emerged, but thanks to Exar Kun, the Sith became defined purely as an ideology, one that could adapt and attach itself to new groups and cultures. Because of this, the Sith would be able to survive numerous defeats over the coming millennia, reforming and adapting after each one, which the older, more inflexible version of the Sith Order would have been incapable of. Our next innovator was a bit of a unique case. We're sure you know the story of Darth Revan by now, the tale of the Jedi Crusader who fought the Mandalorians before succumbing to the dark side and becoming the Dark Lord of the Sith. Revan forged one of history's greatest Sith empires, ruled by a caste of fallen Jedi and an army of traitorous Republic soldiers, an empire that conquered a third of Republic space in the Jedi Civil War. Revan combined Naga Sadow's dream of galactic conquest with Exar Kun's restructuring of the Sith as primarily an order of fallen Jedi, and he used these innovations to great effect. But in his own time, Revan didn't really alter the way the Sith worked as an order all that much. His innovations were primarily concerned with the structure of the Sith Empire. There was one major exception to this, however. Darth Revan was the first Dark Lord of the Sith to understand the greatest weakness of the Sith Order and what must be done to address it. The Sith ignored his insights in this matter for millennia, but 3,000 years later, after Revan's time as Dark Lord, his teachings inspired Darth Bane to make one of the most important reforms in the history of the Sith. It was from Darth Revan's holocron that Bane learned one of the fundamental truths of the dark side. As detailed in the novel Darth Bane: Path of Destruction, those who accept the power of the dark side must also accept the challenge of holding on to it. By its very nature, the dark side invites rivalry and strife. This is the greatest strength of the Sith. It culls the weak from our order. Yet, this rivalry can also be our greatest weakness. The strong must be careful lest they be overwhelmed by the ambitions of those beneath them working in concert. Any master who instructs more than one apprentice in the ways of the dark side is a fool. In time, the apprentices will unite their strength and overthrow the master. It is inevitable, axiomatic. That is why each master must have only one student. This is also the reason there can be only one Dark Lord. The Sith must be ruled by a single leader, the very embodiment of the strength and power of the dark side. If the leader grows weak, another must rise to seize the mantle. The strong rule, the weak are meant to serve. This is the way it must be. We'll talk more about this philosophy when we get to Darth Bane, of course, but would be remiss talking about Bane's own innovations without acknowledging their foundation. It was Darth Revan who recognized the importance of Sith Masters only training a single apprentice at a time. This was essential to the Sith way, as it was predicated on the Dark Lord being the strongest of the Sith, only able to be overthrown and defeated by one stronger than them. But if a Dark Lord had multiple apprentices, it could ruin everything, as weaker apprentices would inevitably band together to slay the Master, and the Sith as a whole would be weakened. Revan put this into practice in his own Sith Empire. He and his successor, Darth Malak, each only ever trained a single true apprentice at a time, as did lesser Sith within their order. They maintained an army of fallen Jedi and Sith acolytes, but these were lesser Sith, tools rather than genuine apprentices. It was a small innovation, but it was one that made Revan's Sith far more stable than the Sith usually were, until Revan himself, having been redeemed to the light side, destroyed the Sith's upper leadership, leaving those dark Jedi and acolytes to fight over and ultimately destroy what power remained. After the end of Revan's time as Dark Lord, this teaching of his was quickly discarded. The next Dark Lord of the Sith after Malak, Darth Traya, took 2 apprentices, and as Revan predicted, they teamed up and overthrew her. The true Sith and the new Sith paid no heed to Revan's wisdom either, and for a long time, Revan's innovation was discarded by the Sith until Darth Bane reinstituted it. Speaking of Sith who paid no heed to Revan's wisdom, our next Sith innovator was Darth Ruin, who rebuilt the Sith after 1,000 years of dormancy, making them worse in virtually every respect in the process. Ruin was certainly an innovator, but his innovations made the Sith much less effective except in one key respect: longevity. Ruin's followers and their successors were scattered and individually ineffective, but they were like a hydra. No matter what casualties the Sith suffered, new Sith cults would always emerge to replace those that had been destroyed. Because of this, Darth Ruin's new Sith lasted for 1,000 years, unleashing centuries of hell upon the galaxy. Like many Sith, Darth Ruin was once a Jedi Master, an Umbaran named Phaneus. He was incredibly strong in the Force, intelligent and charismatic, and he was widely respected by the people of the galaxy. But Phaneus was also a controversial figure within the Order. Some saw him as nothing but trouble, while others saw him as a genius whom others only disliked because he thought outside the box. This controversy stemmed from Phaneus's solipsist philosophy, which preached that yourself is the only thing you can ever be certain is actually real. This philosophy conflicted with the Jedi Code, earning Phaneus several reprimands from the Jedi Council. The Jedi's rejection of Phaneus's philosophy made him bitter, and this drove him to leave the Jedi Order. Phaneus spent the next few years wandering the galaxy, seeking out the Sith, who had been reduced to a few obscure cults, living on the fringes of space by this point in history. Between these cults, and a Sith holocron Phaneus had stolen from the Jedi Temple, the former Jedi Master quickly learned the ways of the Sith and fell to the dark side. It didn't take long for the teachings of the Sith to instill in him a desire for revenge against the Jedi for refusing to accept his teachings. To that end, he sought to resurrect the Sith and build a new empire of his own, with which he hoped to destroy the ones who had dared reject him. In secret, Phaneus reunited the scattered Sith cults, and at the same time, he traveled regularly back into the Republic to meet with his old Jedi friends, who he slowly began to corrupt to the dark side, enlisting them to spread his heresies within the ranks of the Jedi Order. In 2000 BBY, Phaneus took on the mantle of Darth Ruin and proclaimed himself the new Dark Lord of the Sith, and his followers revealed themselves, beginning the Jedi Order's 4th Great Schism. Chaos spread across the Republic as the Jedi loyal to the Council waged war against Darth Ruin and his new Sith. The new Sith seized control of the furthest reaches of Republic space, hoping to use them as a base of power for a new Sith Empire, and the new Sith Wars began. Darth Ruin resurrected the Sith Order, but in a much different form than it had taken before. His new Sith were much more loosely affiliated, and they followed a variant Sith philosophy laid down by Darth Ruin. Ruin's solipsism evolved until he came to see himself as the only being to actually exist, superior to all others, and this led him to devise a philosophy based on the greatest extremes of selfishness. He codified his philosophy in the Creed of Ruin, which was as follows: There is no passion, there is solely obsession. There is no knowledge, there is solely conviction. There is no purpose, there is solely will. There is nothing, only me. This philosophy defined 1,000 years of Sith to come, as the new Sith became far more extreme in their individualism and self-serving tactics than the old Sith had been. Darth Ruin's doctrine of selfishness gave every Sith who followed him delusions of grandeur, and this naturally led to infighting and chaos among the new Sith's ranks. As a result, while the old Sith had been highly centralized, built around vast empires and rigid hierarchies, the new Sith were highly decentralized, a motley confederation of cults and sects ruled by monomaniacal Sith lords with their own conflicting plans and visions. These sects fought each other as much as their enemies, and though their combined influence steadily wore down the strength of the Republic, the new Sith were still incredibly self-defeating, completely incapable of working together for long, and utterly impotent as individual sects. On several occasions throughout the New Sith Wars, they formed alliances or rallied behind especially great Dark Lords such as Darth Ruin himself, but at other times they were entirely at odds. The Sith dynasty that Ruin found was fractious and tactically bankrupt, but it was also ruthless, relentless, and it spawned a long line of monomaniacs hell-bent on seizing as much power as possible. Darth Ruin created a monster that would plague the galaxy for the next 1,000 years, making himself one of the most important Sith Lords in history. Despite this, however, his reign as Dark Lord of the Sith was actually very short, and this was entirely his own fault. Because he believed he was the only thing in the universe that was actually real, Darth Ruin treated his followers poorly, and as a result, they got sick of him very quickly. Before long, a group of Ruin's apprentices banded together and assassinated him. They then turned against each other, battling over who would get to be the next Dark Lord of the Sith, and the would-be new Sith Empire fractured. Darth Ruin's innovations helped the Sith survive for the next 1,000 years, but they also made it borderline impossible for the Sith to get out of their own way, and as a result, even as the Republic entered a Dark Age and verged on total collapse, the Sith were completely incapable of capitalizing on their victory. It fell to our last two Sith innovators to try and fix the problem Ruin had created, and they attempted this in completely different ways. Our second to last Sith innovator was the last leader of the new Sith, the Dark Lord Exar Kun. Kaan lived in the final decades of the new Sith Wars, at a time when the Republic was on the brink of collapse, but the new Sith were too busy fighting over who got to be the Dark Lord of the Sith to take advantage of it. Most of the galaxy was abandoned by both sides, protected only by the Jedi Lords, Jedi who had established permanent protectorships in remote sectors across the galaxy. The Jedi Lords held galactic civilization together, but they were mavericks, rarely acknowledging orders from the Jedi Council and regularly bucking the Order's doctrines when they disagreed with them. For this reason, the Council really didn't like the Jedi Lords, and to cut down on their popularity within the lower ranks of the Order, they selected a champion of their own to lead what was left of the Republic military against the encroaching Sith, then Jedi Master Exar Kun. Kaan was one of the Order's most promising students, gifted with a powerful tie to the Force, an excellent grasp of strategy and economics, and the rare art of battle meditation. He rose rapidly through the ranks, eventually attaining the title of Jedi Master and being tasked with leading a counteroffensive against the new Sith. Not long after he embarked on this mission, however, Kaan became enamored with the teachings of the Sith, fell to the dark side, and declared himself the Dark Lord of the Sith, setting out to unite the Sith under his banner. For that to happen though, the Sith needed to undergo some major changes to address the problem created by Darth Ruin. Kaan's solution to that problem was radical, but highly effective. He dramatically walked back the core Sith idea of the rule of the strong, and offered to recognize all of his rivals' claim to the title of the Dark Lord if they joined him. All Sith Lords who joined Kaan would be equals, he promised. This successfully worked to unite the warring Sith Lords, who together formed the Brotherhood of Darkness. This completely united the new Sith for the first time in centuries, but this came at a cost, as the Brotherhood heavily compromised on many aspects of Sith philosophy. Kaan cracked down on internal competition and infighting in the Brotherhood, forbade the usage of the title Darth for fear it would inspire such competition, and acknowledged all the Dark Lords of the Sith and the Brotherhood as equals, though Kaan was a de facto first among equals. Kaan's Brotherhood was basically just an evil Jedi Order, a Sith faction only in name, but it was very effective at conquering large swaths of the galaxy. The Brotherhood's conquests were opposed, however, by the Army of Light, an alliance of Jedi Lords that went to war with the Brotherhood of Darkness in 1010 BBY. For the next decade, the two sides slugged it out all across the galaxy, culminating in a final, devastating campaign on the planet Urusan. There, the two sides fought 7 battles, inflicting devastating losses on one another. In the end, however, the Jedi triumphed and the Brotherhood's armies were scattered. Lord Kaan and what remained of his followers retreated to a cave system deep beneath a remote valley, where, on the suggestion of the Sith renegade Darth Bane, they created a thought bomb, a powerful force weapon that consumed the souls of all living beings within a large radius, which they sought to use to destroy their Jedi enemies. Kaan, who was beginning to go mad, believed that he and his followers were powerful enough to be able to resist the thought bomb's effects. He was, of course, wrong. As the Jedi descended into the caves to stop him, Kaan detonated the thought bomb with a clap of his hands, and he and all his surviving followers were consumed by it alongside their Jedi foes. For all his failings, Lord Kaan was a visionary. He made more radical changes to the Sith than any Dark Lord before him, correcting the problem of ruin and forging a strong and highly effective fighting force. In his Brotherhood of Darkness, we see an alternate evolutionary path the Sith could have taken, one that sacrificed core aspects of the Sith teachings in exchange for stability and the potential to conquer and rule the galaxy directly. But this path had a critical failing. The elements of Sith philosophy it rejected made it less capable of fully harnessing the power of the dark side. Because of this, Kaan and his followers began to rely more on conventional tactics and weapons than the dark side, and the Sith as a whole were weakened. For that reason, our last Sith visionary chose a completely different path. This last great Dark Lord, of course, was Darth Bane, the one who had deceived Kaan into destroying himself and the rest of the Brotherhood of Darkness. Bane was born on Apatros, where he worked as a Cortosis miner, doing some of the nastiest labor the galaxy had to offer to supply lightsaber-resistant Cortosis to the Republic. On Apatros, his life was hell, and the man who would become Darth Bane only managed to escape it by enlisting in the ground armies of the Brotherhood of Darkness. As a Sith soldier, he quickly proved to have strong Force potential, and he was inducted into the Sith Academy on Korriban, where he was trained to become a Sith Lord. On Korriban, Bane rapidly surpassed the other students at the Sith Academy, despite discovering his talent in the Force relatively late. In the process of studying the history of the Sith, however, Bane came to have doubts about the Brotherhood as he recognized how it had warped the Sith into just a dark mirror of the Jedi Order. In defiance of Kaan, Bane claimed the title of Darth and left Korriban, setting out to uncover more of the teachings of the old Sith. On Lehon, he found Darth Revan's holocron, from which he received the inspiration he needed to formulate his own radical reformation of the Sith Order. In the failings of the Brotherhood, Darth Bane saw evidence of the truth of Revan's ancient teachings. Its many apprentices and lack of a sole leader had made the Sith weak, but Bane believed that simply returning to the old ways would not be enough to resolve the problems with the Sith. Even Revan, he believed, had fallen into the trap of overvaluing the power of military empires and armies of darkside adepts. The Sith empires of old were a failed model, Bane believed, and the only way forward for the Sith was to reject them in favor of cultivating the power of the dark side and using it to accrue power in other respects. Furthermore, Bane believed that this power should be concentrated in as few people as possible. As he later wrote, the dark side was like venom, growing more powerful the more concentrated it was. Based on Revan's teachings, Bane formulated the rule of two. Two there should be, no more, no less. One to embody power, the other to crave it. Bane set out to re-establish the Sith Order, beginning by returning to Ruusan and manipulating Lord Kaan into destroying himself and the rest of the Brotherhood of Darkness. By the time the 7th Battle of Ruusan came to an end, Darth Bane was the last of the Sith Lords, the sole Dark Lord of the Sith, now free to remake the Sith Order as he saw fit. He took an orphaned young girl as his apprentice, naming her Darth Zannah, and for the next 10 years, the two lived in exile on Umbria, where Bane trained Zannah in his new version of the Sith way. Together, Bane and Zannah formulated a grand plan to destroy the Jedi and bring down the Republic from within, allowing the Sith to rule the galaxy at long last. For 20 years after Ruusan, they worked together toward this end, until Zannah killed her master at last, taking the title of Dark Lord of the Sith for herself. Darth Bane was perhaps the most important Dark Lord of the Sith in the entire history of the Order. He alone had found a way to correct the fatal flaw of the Sith, to create a Sith Order that had both long-term stability and that fully embraced the dark side. For millennia, the Sith had been undone, time and time again, by treachery, but under the rule of two, treachery would only make the Sith stronger. Since there would only ever be two Sith Lords, only the stronger of the two could ever kill the other. With every generation of Sith came a new betrayal, and with each betrayal, the Sith grew stronger. Darth Bane carved the Sith down to their bare essentials, and in doing so, he perfected their order. He was the last great Sith innovator, for after him, no further innovation was necessary. Bane had formulated the most effective possible structure for a Sith Order, and all future attempts at doing something different were weak at best and heretical at worst. So that's our look at 6 of history's most innovative Dark Lords of the Sith. Once again, massive shout out to boot.dev for sponsoring this video. If you're serious about learning to code or leveling up your skills, it's one of the best platforms out there. Head to boot.dev and use my code Geetsly for 25% off your first year with the annual plan. Links in the description below.